As more than 3,000 members of the ANC in Mpumalanga picketed at the party's provincial office demanding that its National Executive Committee disband the current Provincial Executive Committee, accusing them of dividing the party through the selection of councilor candidates in a factional manner, they say, as the party concluded its submission of the names to the Electoral Commission of South Africa. The ANC is heading to the Electoral Court to apply for an order that the Electoral Commission of South Africa reopen the registration of local government candidates for a day. The ruling party says it had problems with submitting its list to the IEC. The ANC's Secretary General, or Deputy Secretary General, Jessie Duarte, told a media briefing last Thursday that it needed more time to complete the process ahead of the elections, currently set for October 27. So we speak now to Paul Berkovitz, who is director at the Third Republic. It's a non-profit organization, it says, committed to deepening democratic participation in South Africa. And he's also an elections expert. A very good evening to you, Paul. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So other political parties are crying foul over this, saying they managed to meet the deadline, and there's precedence of parties folding or losing big because the IEC stood firm on the timeline. What are your thoughts about this?
Good evening, Tsepiso. I think the short answer, our opinion and our feeling is that there shouldn't be any further extensions. The timeline must go ahead as it's set, and there should be no further reopening up of registration for candidates.
So just looking at the reasons being advanced by those who agree with the ANC and those who disagree with them, what is your view of the determining factor on equal opportunity, given the fact that the size of the parties are different, etc.? So especially if they talk about the system crashing, is there a way that everybody can be all equal in this process?
Everyone should be equal, Tsepiso, and if I can just speak on a personal or on the level of the work we are doing, it's not a level playing field. And the truth is, if there was an extension for registration, it would actually benefit some of the independent candidates and small parties that we work with. We have one or two candidates we're working with that also didn't get to register on time because of administration problems with the IEC, with the website, with the IEC's resources and systems being overwhelmed last week. And I think, to your other point, the strongest argument in favor of reopening the registration process is that, as you said, the ANC is the biggest party, and many voters would be disenfranchised because the ANC would be their first choice. But the problems of the ANC registering on time, and maybe other smaller parties like the UDM, have got not so much to do with whatever shambles is happening at the IEC, and everything to do with the ANC's internal problems, its factionalism, its inability to agree on candidates, the dissatisfaction with branches that the nomination and the candidate process was opened up to communities as well. The party's in big trouble, and most of the problems are self-inflicted.
And that was pretty much to my next point, that there have been previous reports of ANC branches complaining that the party system of selecting people for its council candidate lists at branch general meetings is flawed. So I wanted to ask you that, how is this important? Is it reflective of the internal ructions than the actual, glitches of the IEC system?
Yeah, it's the former, Tsepiso. The ANC's factionalism problems stretch downwards to the branches. They stretch upwards to the provincial structures. The party didn't register many of the candidates that it could have across the northwest. That's a problem with the provincial structures and factionalism at the provincial level. The provincial level factionalism is bleeding back and forth into local level in KZN. We've seen it in eMsunduzi and eThekwini. The party is in real trouble. The areas you've mentioned where it hasn't registered all of its candidates in Zululand municipalities, in the northern half of KZN, in municipalities across Gauteng. Those are competitive areas where the ANC can't afford to lose any ground.
So as we mentioned earlier on, that at least 7 municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal are amongst the 30 mentioned by the ANC as having missed the IEC's registration. And we saw some branches staging a sit-in at the KwaZulu-Natal provincial headquarters against the removal of a number of their preferred candidates from the list. So just in the party resolving its internal problems, has it manifested externally? And you were mentioning the fact that the smaller players, the independent candidates, could benefit from this. So is there a way of looking at this holistically without being drawn into internal party politics?
If we try and be neutral and not, in theory, you're right, Tsepiso, it can benefit the smaller parties and independents, provided that they have been able to register on time. We know from the numbers from the IEC that we've got more parties and more independents than we had last time, so that's a good sign. But we know that as a percentage of the wards contested, the number of independent candidates is still not a lot. The impact that independents have had in the past hasn't been very high and hasn't been very large. And we know that it's been incredibly difficult to campaign and to do the normal election preparation for all parties under lockdown. And it's even harder for smaller parties and independents without resources. So what will probably happen is we will have an election with one of the lowest turnouts, if not the lowest we've ever had. There will probably be a lot of voter apathy and apprehension because of the health risks of standing in line and voting. And we will have to look at the results when they come out, but I will expect, if nothing else changes, that we will have some very different councils in some areas where the ANC hasn't registered, but there will also be an incredibly low turnout, and I'm sure that questions will be raised and the ANC will make a thing of it after these elections.
So, Paul, I'm going to ask you 2 questions in one, simply because we're running out of time, but I think they're very much related. The ANC has said many candidates' identity documents were rejected due to the absence of voter registration week. So given that the governing party has made it no secret its position on holding local government elections this year, is a case being made for this, in the sense that there are real problems and perhaps the country is not ready for holding local government elections? But then the second question is really the fact that the party is cash strapped. Its Treasury General has said that it's been approached by members and supporters keen to assist the movement, but can it really literally afford to have these elections, the ANC that is?
Well, Tsepiso, these elections are a mess. If we ever needed as a country Marie Kondo to come in and clean up after us, it would be now. And the argument for postponing the elections is based on the assumption that things will be better in 4 or 5 months down the line, whether it's in terms of the risk from COVID or that the ANC or the IEC and other big and small parties will get their acts together. But there's no guarantee of that. The ANC may, with an extension, be able to register more candidates, but it's still only papering over the cracks that it has with its factionalism. The IEC is underfunded and has really dropped the ball in the preparation for these elections. And we would set a very dangerous legal precedent to try and buy the country some more time because of the failures of big parties and the IEC. And I don't think at this stage, although these will be the least free and fair elections we've ever had, almost definitely, I don't think it's worth the cost of creating legal precedents which are dodgy and creating bad law just to reward the planning failures of the IEC.
Thank you so much for your time and insights. Paul Berkovitz is a director at the Third Republic. It's a non-profit organization committed to deepening democratic participation in South Africa. He's also an elections expert.